G'day guys, welcome back to True Eagle. A week or so ago, I did a video reviewing every West Coast Eagles trade since Tim Kelly, basically, so 2019. And I said in that video I would follow that up with a video analysing our drafting. So I was assessing specifically trades this club has done over the last 5 years, choosing that time frame as kind of the decline of West Coast as a football team, and therefore that was the period that's most relevant to where we are now. And similarly, I am going to be choosing every draft from 2019 and going through and assessing the actual draft selections we took. So unfortunately, it gets a little messy when there's live trading in drafts and stuff like that and pick swaps, because pick swaps and live trades are intrinsically linked to assessing how you go at the draft. However, I have kind of covered that in the trade video. If you want to have a look at that, I'll leave a link in the top right corner. Sorry, I'm looking at myself mirror image, so it's a little tricky sometimes. Pretty sure it's that way. Anyway, if you want to go watch that, and I will cover off a little bit of context around some of the pick swaps we did as we went along. I think there's also a school of thought that West Coast have drafted badly over time. For me, I think that's probably more true of the teens era, where we were consistently competitive in finals and playing finals just about every year. And it's less true, now that I've done the work, I think it's less true of recent seasons, but we'll go through and you can make your own assessment as well. As a side note, if you do want me to go back and look at further drafts previously, I can absolutely do that. So let's get stuck into it. Let's go back to the 2019 draft. This was the first year we were traded out of it, basically, in order to get Tim Kelly. So we didn't enter the draft at pick 49. I'll get our selections up here for you now. At pick 49, we took Callum Jamieson, followed by Ben Johnson. Those are the only two selections we took in the national draft. All the players below that, as you can see, Anthony Tracy starts at pick 11 there, is in the rookie draft. So the rookie draft, we will include it, although it does get a little annoying to us assess like how we went in that, because these days the rookie draft is really used for teams to redraft players that they've let go of. But we can absolutely have a look, because every now and then there's a good player taken actually out of the draft pool as intended. But let's start with the national draft selections, 49 and 58 with Ben Johnson. So when we're assessing it, we need to be fair and compare it to the actual pick that we had. It's not the drafting team's fault as such that we basically went into this draft with no selections. So we're going to bear that in mind and compare against what other talent was out there and assess how we went against those things. So Jamieson and Johnson don't sound like an amazing draft haul for sure. However, by sheer virtue of the fact that Jamison's still on the list, it kind of validates a little bit when you consider how late in the draft he was taken. But let's be specific. We will note that Jake Riccardi and Ryan Burns were taken in between Jamieson and Johnson, so you can consider that the opportunity cost of going for Callum Jamieson. I think both of those players have played 60 games at their respective clubs. On the other hand, Jamieson, he hasn't been delisted, had a really bad injury run, and look, he's probably not going to be as good as a Jake Riccardi in my opinion. But at the same time, we probably do need him as a key back on our list, although it was true at the time that he was a ruckman. So look, on that pick, there were some players that we could have picked that may have been better, but it wasn't the worst pick in the world. However, when you look at the Ben Johnson pick, this one actually does hurt a little bit. So there is a number of players taken after Ben Johnson at this selection. Ben Johnson, he never played a game for West Coast. Great speed, great skill. I actually really liked him. Just a little bit small and never cracked a game at AFL level. Jackson Pryor was taken, I think, the pick after, with 39 games at the Brisbane Lions. Look, he might not actually even get a spot, beyond this year or next. I'm not sure when he's out of contract at the Brisbane Lions, so maybe that's not a massive loss. However, it would have been a better selection. Jai Farrar played 34 games and is still on Gold Coast's list. Probably would have been a better selection. Then there's the two that kind of hurt. So there's Michael Frederick from Fremantle. They've really got one over us here. He's played 78 games there. And, save for a really annoying backflip, he's not a bad player at all. So you'd have to say Fremantle got one over us on that one. And then the next one kind of hurts too. Riley Garcia went a number of selections later. And if you've been keeping up with the trade period, Goss, Riley Garcia is linked to West Coast in a trade. I'm hoping that happens. So, in an ideal world, we would have selected him. So, not an amazing draft, that's for sure. We definitely could have done better than Johnson. I haven't completely written off Jamieson, but considering those picks that we had, it's hard to be too critical. I just wish we had picked up Riley Garcia in particular. Can't really bring myself to say I wish we'd picked Frederick, but it obviously would have been better too. Then in the rookie draft, we took Tracy O'Neill as actual live selections. This was one of the last times we actually picked a player straight into the rookie draft. Neither of them played a game at AFL level. We redrafted Archie and Brayshaw, so hard to really compare those. However, Malcolm Roses from Gold Coast was selected pretty late in this draft, so absolutely could have been selected. He's from the Northern Territory. As far as I can tell, he wasn't an academy pick or anything like that. So in theory, we could have picked up Malcolm Roses. But again, the rookie draft is a lottery. We didn't do amazing, that's for sure, but we also weren't really blessed with a great draft hand. So let's move on to 2020, where it's a similar story, to be honest. This is the second year of which we traded out of the draft because of Tim Kelly, and therefore entered it with late picks. Now, also 2020 draft, it's a bit of a minefield. Like, a lot of players didn't play a lot of footy that year, a lot of draft prospects, and as such, the value of picks was considered way lower, and it was one of the shortest drafts of all time, certainly of the modern era. But let's see who we got. We got Luke Edwards at 52, Izzy Winder at 57, and in the rookie draft we added Zane True and Dan Venables. Venables was redrafted. Again, probably have to separate that one because from memory he was contracted. We had to move him to the rookie list. We weren't sure what was happening with his career, so we can probably ignore the Venables pick. But Luke Edwards, look, to be honest, compared to a lot of the guys taken around that range, the fact that he's played 30-odd games and is unlikely to play again for multiple reasons, although I do hope he gets over his concussion issues. It wasn't a horrible pick, and he had some good games for West Coast. I will note that Eddie Ford went 4 picks later, so in theory we could have picked Eddie Ford, who is a better player. But again, there was a bit of a shambles, that draft in general. As for Izzy Winder, I think from a talent point of view, this was a good selection. For a variety of reasons, Winder didn't make it. I mean, he had some off-field issues. He got in a fight in Geelong from memory. And then, he never played a game after that, I don't think. He's actually going real well at the moment. I think he had a good year for South Fremantle on the Waffle, if I'm not mistaken. And I saw Richmond looking at him as a potential draftee. But as for other players that did better, I mean, Jacob Ware at GWS, he's still on the list. He's played 25 games. Technically that's a better outcome. I do wonder if things could have been different for Izzy Winder. To me, probably looked more like a small midfielder than a small forward, and that's kind of where we played him at AFL level. Zane True wasn't a terrible selection. I mean, he's played a handful of games at AFL level and probably just looks between that AFL and Waffle level talent. But out of the rookie draft, that's not terrible, obviously. However, guess who went 1 pick later? Jack Ginnivan. Again, I cringe at the idea of Jack Ginnivan playing for West Coast, but he is a good player, and that would have been much better. So we went for the local boy, and Jack Ginnivan went the selection later. So not a great result, but I've seen much worse picks than Zane True. All right, now we're into the meaty part, because this is kind of where West Coast as an organisation decided, okay, we need to hit the draft. Now, it coincided, in my opinion, with us falling down the ladder. We obviously missed finals that year, and the second half of that year was just beyond a joke. However, I do think West Coast probably went into that season in general saying, okay, we've traded out of the last 3 first rounds. We did the same thing in 18 as well. It's time to hit the draft. And unfortunately, we picked a terrible time of the year to fall down the ladder because we were in finals for a lot of that year and fell away late. I kind of wish we'd just been shit the whole year and got better draft picks. Anyway, I digress. This draft, mixed bag, we've actually got some good outcomes out of it. Pick 14 was Campbell Chesser. We took Brady Hoff at 31, Rhett Basil at 37, Jack Williams at 57, and Greg Clark at 62. I don't know if we took any rookie draft selections, although we did enter the mid-season draft that year, which I'll get to. Let's start with Chesser. This is probably the most criticised West Coast draft selection of this modern little phase that we're currently in. And, not without reason. I am not one of those people that is super critical on Chesser, and I think there is an AFL quality player there. But again, when you're picking in the first round, naturally the expectation needs to be a little bit higher. So as I said in my trade video, the context around this, we did do a live trade back. And again, we probably want to separate that. We want to look at the talent ID. Who could we have picked instead? But I will note that trading back 2 spots cost us access to Ben Hobbs and Josh Sin. But as for the selection itself, when we've moved back 2 selections and gotten an extra second rounder, the other players around that, there are certainly some good ones we could have gone. So Darcy Wilmot, premiership player, was drafted not too long after that. Tom Brown at Richmond probably has shown better signs than Chesser at the same stage of his career. I think he's battled injury as well. There's Lika Lear, hasn't really cracked a consistent game at GWS, but a likely type that could be a good player. Angus Sheldrick is probably another WA midfielder there that we could have genuinely selected. Now, it would have been a bolt at the time, but to be fair, Campbell Chesser was also a bit of a bolt. Sheldrick at 18 went to the Sydney Swans. That was considered a surprise, but again, likewise, Chesser probably wasn't picked to go that earlier in many mocks. Jacob Van Rooyen was also taken in that draft, which kind of hurts. And then there's Kai Lohmann at pick 20. He was drafted out of Victoria, so not an academy selection. Anyone could have taken him. And Matt Johnson went to Fremantle at 25. So a number of worthwhile options there we could have taken. As for Van Rooyen, like, he might be the pick of the bunch out of that group, in my opinion. I suppose Kai Loman's probably the best player, and Wilmot as well, but key forwards take longer. So I think Jacob Van Rooyen might have been the most attractive one there. But bear in mind, like, you think back to our current situation, and I don't know if we really need a Van Rooyen. He'd be nice, but key forwards are probably the one area that we don't really lack in. You certainly make the argument Sheldrick would have been a better option, Tom Brown, Darcy Wilmot for sure. Matt Johnson looks okay. I know Fremantle fans like to lord that one over us. I'm not too gutted that we didn't end up with Johnson. I'd probably prefer a lot of the other names there. But either way, he's probably looking like a better prospect than Chesser at this current point in time. So I think the criticism on that selection, whilst it's too early to absolutely write him off, we've seen enough now where we can think, okay, there might have been some better selections, and that one's probably a miss at this early stage. Bear in mind, all of this is kind of too early. Other than a lot of the players who have been delisted, we still don't know for sure about a lot of these guys. Let's talk about Brady Hough, though. This was one of the best. This might be the best draft selection we've taken in some time, considering how good Brady Hough is at the moment. To highlight some other options we could have gone for, Jake Saligo is a good player at Adelaide. He was around this range. Paul Curtis, Matthew Roberts played in the grand final. Machito Owens was an academy pick, so not available to us. I wouldn't trade Hough for any of those players. And considering he was a bit of a bolter at the time, 31 was early, this was a fantastic selection from West Coast. So really happy with it. And Bazzo went about 6 selections later. Look, this one is actually a pretty good selection too. Bazzo has dealt with a lot since he joined West Coast. I think he looks like a decent AFL player. I'm also glad that he's a key back, which we need. And that's another thing that you've got to consider here. What were our needs at the time? It's a little bit hard to go back and forecast, but we do have a need for a key back on the list at the moment. So other names that were around that range, Corey Warner, Blake Howes, Arthur Jones. Could Corey Warner help us get Chad? It may not matter. Arthur Jones looks pretty exciting and is from WA, but Bazzo's played more games than all of them, and I still think it wasn't a bad selection. Then Jack Williams went late in that draft. This is, again, one of our best selections of this era. Only Lockie Rankin was taken between he and Greg Clark, who was our next selection. Jack Williams, absolute steal. So out of this draft, to get Hough and Williams so far based on the talent, and Bazzo and Chesser still maybes, but I'm kind of confident that Bazzo at least can be a best 22 player, and I'm still somewhat optimistic on Chesser. It doesn't have the top-end punch, but we've done pretty well with this draft in general. We also took Greg Clark. That didn't really cost us much. It was a future fourth in a trade, and the players taken after him, you know, I mean, Woe Woden was a father-son, and he might be better, but eh. In the mid-season of that draft, we took Will Collins and Connor West. Now, I'll note that there's some other good players in that draft. Judd McEntee. Jed or Judd? Jed McEntee? Either way, the Port Adelaide guy, McEntee, he would have been better. Will Collins didn't really fire a shot for West Coast. There's also Jordan Boyd, who has become a very good player for Carlton. So a couple of misses there. Connor West played a bit of footy for us, was one of the last picked anyway. So let's move to 2022. This is another big draft, a really important draft. So again, the context around this, we traded 2 down for 9 and 14. So it's a little bit hard to separate the decision to trade with the decisions we took with the picks, because they were probably all made at the same time, more or less. Well, we at least had a good idea of what kind of talent was going to be available at those selections. So pick 9, Ruben Ginbey, 14, Elijah Hewitt, 23, Barnett, 29, Bergiel, 58, Long, and then we redrafted Winder and True in the rookie draft. We also took Jai Cully in the mid-season draft, so we'll cover all of those. So separating the trade, just the talent ID and the picks here. Ginbey was taken ahead of Philippou, Oliver Hollands, and Jed Buslinger. Buslinger looks pretty good, hasn't played at AFL level yet. I still like him on the list, but Ruben Ginbey at the time looked like a gun mid, and that was certainly the need at the time. And while he has become a defender, I don't think I would be trading him for Buslinger. Philippou could end up better. There's no doubt about that. I think there's a lot of potential there, and he probably was my preference at the time from memory. That being said, I think you'd have to give us a pass for taking Ruben Ginbey at the moment. I think he's shown a lot as a defender who can potentially roll through the middle, maybe like Jack Crisp one day. That's idealistic, obviously. But yeah, I think you got to give us a tick. Nobody surely is too upset that we took Ginbey over Philippou or something just yet. As for Hewitt, again, there's a couple of other WA boys and a number of father-sons and academies that were taken after. So realistically, between Hewitt and our next selection, Barnett, a couple of other guys we could have looked at were Ed Allen from Collingwood and Darcy Jones from GWS. Now, I think Hewitt has Allen covered. Allen looks all right, but I still think Hewitt is the better talent. If Hewitt has his career ruined by injury, which I'm not saying is going to happen, but let's say worst case scenario. Does that mean that the pick's wrong? I mean, West Coast didn't know that he was going to get injured, so I don't know if you'd criticise on that. I think on talent ID, Hewitt was clearly the right selection. Darcy Jones is very talented though. Darcy Jones has probably shown more than Hewitt. He certainly produced more highlights, although Hewitt did have some highlights in his first season. So even if you concede that Darcy Jones is more talented, which I'm not sure I'm there yet, but let's just say, you bear in mind that we still really needed to replenish the midfield, and Hewitt is a midfielder. Of course, he's going to have to build up his tank, but he's a midfielder. Whereas Darcy Jones probably isn't that for us. So honestly, I think I'm glad we took Hewitt rather than Darcy Jones, purely on, what he adds to our midfield going forward. I think you got to have a bias towards genuine midfielders, particularly given the weakness of ours. Harry Barnett, again, he's not tracking amazingly well, or at least he had a down year, and he's played a couple of games at AFL level, so that's decent. Other names we could have selected: Charlie Clark, Lewis Hayes, Braden George, Jacob Ryan. None of these guys have really made an impact at AFL level yet, so there was only a few picks between Barnett and Bergiel. So that one's just too early to call. There's not really enough data there to suggest we've got it right or got it wrong. I think we picked the highest rated ruckman in that draft, and I think we needed to. So yeah, the jury's out on that one. I can't say it's a pass or a fail. As for Bergiel, he may or may not get a spot on the list next year. So a couple of other players that I like that went after him were Lockie Cowan, who was at Carlton. Hasn't necessarily set the world on fire, but I think he's been a pretty good player in his 24 games, and you'd have to say that would have been probably better than Kobe Bergiel. And Henry Huswaite, he's only played the 6 games. I'm not sure if he got injured, but from what I've seen of him, he looks like a likely type as a really tall midfielder at Hawthorn. So again, too early to absolutely rule him out. We don't even know if he's delisted yet, and things can change, but a couple of other suggestions there for players that would have probably been better. And then Noah Long, again, up there with Hoff and Williams, are some of the best draft picks we've taken in the last 5 years, considering the only player taken after him was Kyle Marshall. I think that's Todd's brother who went to Port Adelaide, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a big win. So overall, Ginbey, Hewitt and Long may be the only meaningful players we get out of this draft. But on balance, I think, to get 3 decent players in a draft, and hopefully there's still some A+ talent in there. I still think Hewitt has that. Ginbey could be an A grader as well. I think that's going all right. I think we've done all right there. Let's talk about Jai Cully though. We do note that we took him in the mid-season draft at selection 1. Now, mid-season draft again is a little bit of a lottery, but nonetheless, we did have pick 1. And some other players we could have taken. The 2 that stick out are Massimo D'Ambrosio, who went at pick 3. Jai Menzies has also gone all right at Essendon. Maybe he's not an absolute gun, but Jai Cully, who knows? It's a little bit too early to absolutely rule him out, but let's just concede that Jai Menzies and Massimo have done more at AFL level at this stage. Is that the best way to assess a draft pick, which is a long-term investment? Probably not. But you can probably say we should have gone Massimo. As it currently stands, Jai Cully is without a contract as I'm recording this for season 2025. So I think he'll get one, but at the moment he's kind of line ball, whereas Massimo was just about All-Australian this year. Let's quickly talk about 2023. Again, so early to try and assess this. However, there's still some interesting findings out of this. So obviously, we took Harley Reid with pick 1. We took Archer, his cousin, that's not true, at pick 30. Clay Hall at 38, that was part of a live trade. Harvey Johnston at 49, and we took Locke Rawlinson with pick 1 in the rookie draft. So let's unpack that. Is anyone unhappy that we took Harley Reid at pick 1? No, but I think it's not so much the opportunity cost of who should have gone pick 1 instead. Obviously, I think we all agree Harley. But there was also a trade that we rejected from North Melbourne. I've done a little bit of the math on it. We actually don't know what 100% was offered from him. I think the prevailing rumour was picks 2, 17 and 18 from North Melbourne. If you follow on Toomey's logic, Toomey suggested that West Coast wanted Curtin outside of Jed Walter and Harley Reid. So if we're picking with that selection, it might have been Daniel Curtin. And then going back through the later selections, those picks ended up being like 22 and 23. Riley Hardiman was one of them, running wingman defender from North Melbourne. He was West Australian from Swan Districts. And Lance Collard, apparently we were very keen on him. He was part of our NGA. So we might have had Daniel Curtin, Riley Hardiman, and Lance Collard. It's too early to lock it in, but I'm very happy we didn't trade Harley Reid for these, considering none of those guys are midfielders. Of course, we might have picked different players there, but I think keeping him was the right call. Let's talk about the later picks though. Pick 30, Archer Reid. Again, it's so early to really speculate, but let's just talk about some players that were taken after him. Logan Morris was the next selection. Again, look, Logan Morris, obviously premiership player now, had a great first season. However, probably some advantages, probably a little bit more physically ready than Archer. He also didn't get drafted with a partial ACL tear, and he's playing in a good team. Archer being 203 centimetres was always going to take longer. So we'll just note that Logan Morris, it would have been a great selection too. I think Archer probably is a player that we need more in the sense that, okay, he's 191 centimetres, but with Marek and Waterman, Logan Morris could end up better than all of them, don't get me wrong, but we don't really need him. Whereas a 203 centimetre forward ruck at least is something different. So I think Archer's first season at West Coast was fairly decent. Too early to call, but it's just interesting to note that. Clay Hall, again, we live traded for this, so it's messy as to really assessing how it went, because you have to factor in this year's future third, or last year's future third, that is the third round selection in this year's draft. That is now with Richmond as a result of this trade. However, if we're just looking at players we could have drafted instead of Clay Hall, Kane McAuliffe was taken with the pick that we originally had that we gave to Richmond. Joe Fonte from Western Australia went to GWS. I think he looks like a likely type. We could have taken Ollie Murphy, a key back. I don't think that would have been the worst call. He ended up at Fremantle. And Joel Fraser played some good footy at AFL level. However, too early to really write off Clay Hall here. So again, no immediate concerns with this selection. Then there's Harvey Johnston at 49. I think we've done really well here. So there's Zane Sakostelski, another key back out of Western Australia that went to the Brisbane Lions. Archie Roberts did have a pretty decent first year at Essendon. I can't remember how many games he played, but there was some 20-plus possession games there. Then there was Aidan O'Driscoll, a wingman who got drafted to the Western Bulldogs, another Western Australian. Tragically, he's had to retire because of concussion already. Yeah, it's kind of awkward to talk about, but I mean, I suppose if he'd been drafted to us, there's no guarantee that would have happened as well. We'll never really know on Aidan O'Driscoll. I suppose what I'm saying is it's not necessarily a win that we didn't draft him. But yeah, thoughts go out to the young man. But honestly, Harvey Johnston versus Zakostelski and Archie Roberts, I'm very comfortable with that. And I think that was a good selection so far. As for Locke Rawlinson, pick one in the rookie draft, well, again, this is, it's becoming decreasingly common that teams actually pick 18-year-old prospects or actual players that didn't belong to them already. However, Sam Closey did get drafted by the Gold Coast Suns. He is a mature ager that was one of the best players in the VFL. I think he was the best young talent in the VFL. Gold Coast took a punt on him. That could have been us. It's too early to rule out Rawlinson, but Closier did have a great debut season, so maybe a little bit of a miss there. And we'll touch on Ryan Marek, who was a mid-season draft selection this year as well. I think we nailed this pick. I just looked at the draft, and Robert Hanson Jr. went pick 2 to North Melbourne. There's Matt Coulthard, who played 6 games for Richmond or something like that. Caleb Poulter played a role for the Bulldogs, and then Quinton Narkle, was part of Port's best 22. But I think comfortably, Ryan Marek was the one we nailed. So between Marek and Hutchinson, I think those are the two that we nailed and are two genuine best 22 players. Cully's probably more touch and go in my personal opinion, but well done West Coast on Ryan Marek. So overall, bit of a mixed bag. We didn't nail every top end pick. I mean, all of our first rounders, Harley Reid, Jinby, Hewitt's decent, and Chesser probably the one that there's some doubt around, although, it remains to be seen how that really ends up. It is worth noting that there were some pretty good players taken not long after him. So let's call it what it is. Probably could have done better with that selection without writing him off yet. But we've had some wins in the second and third rounds, man, and the fourth, like Hoff and Bazzo, Jack Williams, those guys all came in the same draft. You have to give some credit where it's due. We've probably had potentially a miss in Bergiel. Again, he may get delisted. and a little bit early on Barnett, but then Noah Long at 58. That's pretty good. So I think we have to accept it. There's so many ways to build your list, and it's not just the first rounders that you keep nailing, it's the accumulation of late draft picks that you get really good value out of. And I think over the last, let's call it from 2021, our drafting has been okay. Of course, the young talent is relatively shallow. We still got a few more years of drafting, and then I'm sure we'll continue to add to this. But that's my review of our drafting over the last 5. Overall, not too bad. Again, I'm sure and I'll do this if you want me to, if you go through 2013 to 2019 or 2018, maybe it's not such a good picture. But anyway, guys, let me know in the comments what you think of this analysis, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.